Runston from Community Alliance with Family Farmers in Davis, and I'm your moderator. I've been watching the moderators here. It seems like the panelists have a much better deal. They get to talk and talk. So before we get started, I just wanted to say a couple things. The title of this panel is So You Want to Be a Farmer? And we have a very esteemed panel of farmers with us today. I was thinking about that. I was thinking if you want to be a farmer in LA, you probably need a jackhammer and take up some of the pavement. And LA was the #1 ag county in the United States for decades and perfect place to grow almost anything. So it is appropriate in some sense to talk about farming in Los Angeles. When I was a kid, my dad was a farmer, and he told me that I would never be a good farmer because I didn't like to get up early in the morning. And he taught me that because as a farmer you have to go out hunting and fishing, and hunting and fishing are activities that you have to also get up very early in the morning to do. And I think maybe that's why farmers like that. But one thing over the years that struck me is that if you want to be a farmer, you need to be a good mechanic. And that wasn't something that I was any good at either, so I became an economist. And I do policy stuff, and I spend my time trying to defend family farmers and keep them in business. So anyway, what we're going to do here is I'm going to introduce this panel, and then I'm going to have each of them talk for 5 to 10 minutes about how they came to be a farmer and a couple of tips that they would suggest for people who wanted to be a farmer, things that you might want to keep in mind. So we'll start here. Mud Baron at this end is from Pitchfork Farms here in Los Angeles. It's one of only 2 certified flower growers in Los Angeles County, and he grows 2,000 dahlias. I think we got some flowers right here from them, and it's also growing the next generation of Los Angeles farmers by supporting school gardens throughout Los Angeles County. Next is Michael O'Gorman, who's been an organic farmer for over 40 years. I won't go into the colored first 20 years. Colorful, I think is the word I was going to say. But for the last 20 years, he's been the production manager for some of the nation's largest organic vegetable companies, including TKO, Mission, and Jacobs Farm Del Cabo, where he oversaw 1,600 acres of tomatoes, basil, and vegetables down around Ensenada. He founded the Farmer Veteran Coalition in 2008 and likes to spend his time mentoring the young veterans in that program. Next is Al Corshane, and Al is the owner of Frog Hollow Farm in Brentwood, California, up in the Bay Area, which he started from scratch 36 years ago. He grows some of the greatest fruit in the world, and everyone in the Bay Area knows him as Farmer Al. Next is David Karp, famously profiled as the fruit detective in The New Yorker. He writes a weekly column about farmers markets called Market Watch for the Los Angeles Times. He's also a citrus researcher for the Department of Botany and Plant Sciences at UC Riverside, and he has 10 acres of stone fruit that's being farmed by Andy Mariani in Morgan Hill. And finally, Romeo Coleman from Coleman Family Farms in Carpinteria. The farm was started in 1964 by Bill Coleman, and Bill and his wife Delia have farmed the same land using sustainable methods ever since. One of their 6 children, Romeo, joined them in 1996 after graduating from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And they produce a lot of greens and sell at farmers markets and to restaurants here in Los Angeles. So let's just start with you, Romeo, and come this direction. And so I'm going to give you 5 to 10 minutes.
Take 3 minutes.
Closer to 5 would be better than 10 to talk about how you got into farming and what advice you give people about farming.
I got into farming because I was born into it. I was one of 6 children that grew up on a small family farm in Carpinteria. And we were, live the details of a small farm because we were woken up every morning by our dad, and even in the summertime during school break, if we wanted to go to the beach, we'd have to do at least a half a day's work before we could ride our bikes down to the beach. So it's a lot of work, but it instilled in us good values that, hopefully we'll pass on to our kids. But I think just being born into it and being one out of 6 kids that decided to do it, we're on a small farm, so there wasn't room for all of us to do it. But since I was little, then I was always the one that would try to plant different things and have a little bit of a green thumb. And it wasn't until I was in my early 20s that I decided I better capitalize on the fact that I could take over my parents' farm and bring the tradition, another level, another generation. So I attended Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo and learned about big agriculture and a lot of differences between that and what we do on our small little farm. So that was a good learning experience, and it brought me back to when I was graduating. I decided to go back to the family farm and maybe take it another couple levels up from what it was, but not get quite into a factory farming mode, because that's a whole different way of agriculture. And just going to Cal Poly, it was a good experience. It's a real hands-on school, so I learned a lot on traditional and just not very much sustainable stuff, but just traditional farming. And a lot of the professors were actual farmers or had backgrounds in farming, but a lot different style than what my parents brought us up doing, which was small family farming, lots of different varieties, stuff that you're not just planting just to eat, you're planning to help out other plants or planning to help the whole system on your farm. And so just knowing that in my head and learning about different aspects at school, when I graduated, I decided to come back to the family farm and, slowly step in and not try and nudge my dad out, because through the first year back, I learned that I still had a lot to learn from him, because he's been farming his whole life a different way than I learned at school. And working with him, I'm still learning a lot of things to do and a lot of things not to do. So it goes both ways. But so it was a good transition to come back to the farm and try and put it all together and slowly build up the farm a little bit more, just where it's it's still manageable, still maintainable, and I still have somewhat of a life, but I'm still farming also, which is why I wanted to do this kind of lifestyle, because I want to be a farmer. I don't want to be a marketer. I don't want to be a guy who sits in an office and calls people and tells them what to do or where stuff has to go. I actually like to be out there and get my hands dirty, get my clothes dirty, get dirty myself, and feel it. Because being on the farm, there's nothing like it, where you get stuff from the air and the soil and the sun, and you create a product and you get to bring it to market and sell it. It's a whole big circle. So that's why I really enjoy it. But as far as trying to get into farming, or if you want to start out farming, I think the biggest things in California is land and water. Since I was born into the farm, then I have we have 6 acres that we own, and that's always something I can fall back on. And the rest of the land we rent, because trying to buy land in beautiful, sunny coastal California is extremely difficult if you're on a farmer's salary. So it's always nice to have that 6 acres to fall back on, and know that I can actually still make a living on that 6 acres. And so I think the biggest thing for anybody really getting into farming is land and water in California. In different parts of the United States, it would be a different situation, different things they'd have to think about. But just coming from a small farm here, it's land and water. That's about all I got to say.
Okay, great. Thank you. So if we want to be a farmer, your father should be a farmer. That's a
Yeah.
that's always a good suggestion. Yeah.
Yeah.
David Karp, 5 to 10 minutes.
All right. I'm on a panel with 4 other real farmers, so I feel like a little bit of an imposter. I'm a journalist. I'm a writer by profession. I've been writing for the New Yorker, Los Angeles Times about food and very particularly about fruit for the last 20 years. I was a medievalist and a punk rock producer before that, so naturally segued into fruit detection. Just in the last 5 years or so have I had any right to even call myself a smidgen of a farmer, and this is how it came about. Soon after I started writing for the New York Times, my first love was apricots. From growing up as a young man in Southern California, my Aunt Ellie had an apricot tree. So the first article that I set out to write when I started researching in California was apricots. It was about apricots. And I asked the apricot board who was really knowledgeable, who was the man, the guru when it came to apricots. And they told me Andrew Mariani of Morgan Hill, which is in just south of San Jose in what used to be the Valley of Heart's Delight and is now known as Silicon Valley. But his family came there 80 years ago in what's now Sunnyvale. They moved to Morgan Hill, which was then in the sticks. Now it's a bedroom community for San Jose. And they started growing apricots, prunes, peaches, cherries. And I fell in love with his knowledge, because he had the whole shebang. He knew the history, the science, the art, and very particularly about the different varieties and how they react to different horticultural practices in different growing areas. And he knew which tasted best. And that was a pretty unique set of knowledge. I was really impressed, and I stayed in touch with him over the years. In addition to educating me about apricots, one day, I happened to be at his orchard in like the end of July, and he said, here, come taste this. And he showed me this, a plum tree. I could tell it was a European plum tree. It was a small, unimpressive fruit, and I said, ooh, that doesn't look very good. He said, taste it. It's about this big. I plopped it in my mouth, and I've seen this time and time again. I practically screamed. When people tasted it, it was just so amazing. And I said, what is that? He said, that's a green gage plum. And I said, why have I never tasted it before? And he said, beats me. It used to be grown here commercially, could and should be grown again. So I said, well, we'll do that. And he said, okay, but you know what? He's a much better fruit connoisseur and grower than he is a businessman, so he never really had enough money for that. I'm far from wealthy, but over the years, as I was thinking about this, I went to southwestern France. The New York Times sent me there for 8 years ago for 2 weeks to research green gages. That was really a plum assignment. And I fell in love with this fruit. And I wrote about it. And in fact, there are a number of people. There's somebody with a couple acres up in Oregon. There's somebody in Sonoma County who put in like, I don't know, a quarter acre or something like that. And I just found about it somebody else. But the articles that I wrote and speaking on the radio did not have the desired effect, which is to jumpstart a budding industry, a renewal of cultivation of this most delicious fruit. In my opinion, it's the most delicious stone fruit in the world. Let me just describe it a little bit. It's sweet, it's very sweet, like halfway to being a date sweet, like 30 plus bricks. It's also got counterbalancing acidity. It's got a pleasant resistance to the palate when you pop it in your mouth. And it's got a complexity and intensity. And perforce a very pleasant complexity. I've tasted intense, complex fruits that are very unpleasant, and this, however, is a true noble fruit. So why is it not grown commercially? You know, I think it was outclassed in size and productivity by Asian plums. Anyway, I'm probably eating up my 5 minutes, but I decided, let's just get this done. Here I am, advancing in age, and if I don't do it, who will? So I put up the money with a charitable contribution through California Rare Fruit Growers. Although I'm deeply involved with the planning of the orchard, it started in 2006, so this was fourth leaf this year. We got our first crop on let's see, we planted 3.5 acres of what's called the Bunyard Orchard, named after Edward Bunyard, author of The Anatomy of Dessert, the Shakespeare of fruit, the great English pomologist from the late 19th and early 20th century. It's mostly green gage, some mirabelles, another even smaller yellow European plum, mostly used for eau de vie and preserves, but also delicious eaten fresh, as well as a collection of various, I hate to use the word, but heirloom stone fruit for short. And we've also got about half an acre of Moore Park, the most delicious apricot, western apricot grown in California. So those are starting to bear, most of those fruits are starting to bear this year, and they were amazing. It was so gratifying. There is nothing like having an orchard that you yourself have planned from the very beginning and conceptualized, and then you come along year after year, a couple times a year, attending to the details, consulting with Andy Mariani, and then you come for the harvest, and there it is. Oh, man, that is great. So would I call myself a farmer? Well, I was actually so impressed by this demonstration plot, because that's really all it was, just 3 acres, that I ponied up the money for a for-profit, in theory, an additional 7 acres. So we've got 10 acres in total of stone fruit. The other 7 were just planted this year, including fantastic candy cots, Central Asian apricots that basically I heard about many years ago and wrote about for the New York Times, and I fell in love with it and said, I got to grow this. Big Al here too is also got a piece of that pie. And we're thinking of planting another 5 acres or so of green gages. I'm hoping to make money off that, but I'm doing it for love, just because I thought, let's give this as a present to the world, this fantastic fruit. Now, let me mention one thing. As Romeo was saying, the key is land and water. Well, guess what? In Morgan Hill, land is like $100,000 to $200,000 an acre. I don't have anything like that kind of money, and that would be crazy to invest that. Why buy the cow, as Andy likes to say, when milk is cheap? So we're renting that land for a couple $100 an acre. That's not a great idea. That's not ideal by any means, because, of course, these are long-lived, relatively stone fruit trees. But so the best we were able to do was a 10-year lease. In conclusion, I'll say my other part of helping people to be farmers is I'm constantly being consulted, because people think that I've traveled the world, traveled in the United States. I might have some idea of good varieties that they should grow when they're starting a farm. Or even a lot of people who sell at farmers markets say, hey, what kind of citrus or what kind of this should I plant? I always start out by telling them, remember, I'm a journalist. Take whatever I say with more than a grain of salt. But it also gives me great joy to recommend something like, for example, to Lyle Babcock of Deer Creek Heights Ranch in the southern San Joaquin Valley. I told him about finger lime some 6 years ago. And not that long ago, last year, he came up to me. This is a big bear of a guy. And he puts his arms around me, smooch. And I said, wow, what's this? And he said, thank you for telling me to grow these finger limes. I'm getting $50 a pound for these. On the other hand, there's probably half a dozen times where people have planted something and it wasn't quite as good an idea. So with that, I'll give up the floor to Big Al here.
Yeah, that's a good act of all there. Thanks, David. All right, Al.
I count myself among those who seek consultation and ideas from David Karp. He's definitely a great gift and enhancement to the organic fruit or to the fruit industry in general. And both David and Romeo have talked about the two most critical. This panel is about so you want to be a farmer. Well, so you want to be a farmer, the most critical thing you have to have is millions of dollars. Reminds me of a joke. Somebody once asked a guy a farmer who just won the lottery, what are you going to do with all that $1 million you just won? And he says, well, I'm just going to keep farming until it's all gone. Actually, I'll just briefly touch on this subject a little bit longer to recommend a book that's currently out. It's called Slow Money. It's a new movement. It's kind of like the good food movement. It goes hand in hand with the good food movement. It's called Slow Money, Investing If food, fertility, and farming really mattered. And I recommend you all read it. It's about how we can change the way we invest in America and how we can invest locally and invest in sustainable food systems. It's a very important movement. And by the way, I'd also like to plug the Slow Food Conference, or Convivium. It's being held up in San Francisco in about a month. I think the 12th, 13th, and 14th. Check that out on the web. I'll say a little bit about how I got into farming. Different experience from David or Romeo. I was a school teacher in Hawaii, and I was an organic gardener. I had a garden in the backyard. I like to grow my own fruits and vegetables, mostly veggies. And I was actually sharing a home with, or I lived in a house with an old college track teammate of mine named Bill. And one Sunday morning, it was raining outside. This is in Honolulu, Hawaii. He came up to me and he said, Bill came up to me and said, Al, we're going to become farmers. And then he described to me how we were going to rent or buy 200 acres on the big island of Hawaii and grow papayas. And he had all figured out on paper. And agricultural business plans always look really, really good. Farmers always make, millions of dollars on paper if you have enough land. Even if you only have a couple acres, you still make a lot of money. But it's a little more difficult in reality. But anyway, so after about half hour of discussion, I was about 28 years old at the time, and after about a half hour of discussion, we got each other all revved up and excited about this idea. Went down to this local food mart and bought 2 papayas, and then went over to the garden shop and bought some Dixie cups and shovels, and back home, and we cut the papayas open, scooped out the seeds, and we planted we planted the seeds in Dixie cups. And so I'm pretty sure that this would be a world record for the fastest anybody ever started a farm. But if we actually, from idea to planting the seed in about 2 hours. We literally planted the seeds. And they grew. The papayas grew. We tended them for several weeks. And meanwhile, we figured at that age, well, we'll just go out and first we'll plant the trees and then we'll get the land later. It shows you how naive I am. So the first, so what you need to be a farmer is, number one, you need to be really, really innocent or naive or ignorant. And you need to be really, really rich or have a rich benefactor, like an investor from the slow money movement. I think that's your best chance these days. There's a great organization called FarmLink, which hooks up or connects wannabe farmers with people who own land but don't know what to do with it. Maybe their children didn't want to be farmers, and maybe they were farmers, or they inherited it from somebody in the family who was a farmer, and they don't know what to do with it. And so FarmLink is an organization that finds people with land and people who want to farm that land. And now Slow Money is putting the final piece of the puzzle together by creating an investment idea, an investment system, and almost an investment slow food movement, you might say, to help young farmers or beginning farmers, whether they're young or not so young. And so I think that I've been farming for 36 years and loving every minute of it. I farm for the same reasons that Romeo mentioned. I love being outside, I love being on the land. But I will say this, there's a few other things you need besides passion and money to be a farmer. You need to be a mechanic, you need to be an accountant, you need to be a marketer, you need to be a people person, you need to be a PR guy, you need to be able to establish relationships with your buyers. It's like you have to be a jack of all trades and master of all of them to be successful in farming. So I think that's about all I have to say for the moment. I'll pass the baton on to Michael.
Let me just say one thing. Al mentioned the Farm Link here in California. It's called California Farm Link, and you can look it up. They have a website, and they run a series of programs that provide technical assistance to beginning farmers and also loans from the USDA FSA for beginning farmers. And the USDA just gave them $500,000 the other day, and so they're trying to find people who are starting farms. There's a couple other organizations like that, ALBA in the Salinas area in Watsonville, and then also the Center for Land-Based Learning up in Winters, which is run by Craig McNamara, who's the son of Robert McNamara, the former Secretary of Defense, and Craig is the chairman of the State of California Food and Ag Board this year. So there's a number of organizations that actively try to help beginning farmers, and another one is the Farmer Veteran Organization, which Michael is going to talk about.
Okay, thanks, David. Well, my name is Michael, and I've been a farmer since 1970, and then for a year or two, I basically became a farmer because I never did my homework in school and barely got out of high school and needed to go to get something to eat at the end of the day, and was comfortable. I grew up gardening with my father. He had a real passion for gardening and a real interest in, he was a literature teacher who loved Thoreau and nature, and took us all over the mountains and rivers and streams of California. And so out of his 7 children, he raised 2 of us that became farmers for our entire lives. My brother's been very content on the same 100 and something acres, about 25 of it that he farms fruit and vegetables on in Northern California for the last 40 years. And I ended up on a kind of eclectic trip around the country where I had 6 different farms that I managed production for over 40 years, and the last 3 of which were some of the largest organic companies in the country, if not the world, in terms of their scale. So I'm working now on this new project. I call it my 7th farm. And I have a feeling it's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, because like everybody else, farming is a way of life, and it's a passion, and it's just something you can never give up. And that is, I'm working with young people. I'm focused with young men and women who are coming out of the military, most of who are served in Iraq and Afghanistan. We're now working with about 265 of them through my organization that we're helping get started in agriculture. So I spend virtually all my time one-on-one trying to figure out and help them do exactly this, how to become farmers. And I think of this, and one of the things that I say a little differently, because I've been on a number of these panels, So You Want to Be a Farmer panel. There was actually one named just that I was on, but it was because it was a family farm in Chicago. And most everybody said the main thing is a market plan and a business plan. And I really think that the most important thing you bring into farming is your knowledge. And that, and while, Al and some of the rest of us that have, struggled to stay alive in this industry, and probably our biggest feat is that we stayed alive in farming for that many decades. I think, just that is somewhat of a personal victory. You guys are looking at something different. In my lifetime, in my career, the amount of farmers in the United States have dropped from 2.2 million to 960,000. And at the same time, the population's increased from 200 million to 310 million. And so that ratio of farmers to the population has been cut in a third. And it now costs $10,000 to ship a 48-foot trailer of produce from Los Angeles to Hunters Point, or one of the markets on the East Coast, which up to about 10, 15 years ago was the average value of a truckload of produce. So in your lifetime, everything's going to change, and with the scarcity of water and the scarcity of land and the need for more produce, just with a 40% increase of population in the next 40 years, and the fact that everybody needs to eat 50% more vegetables so that our population doesn't die off of diabetes and obesity, means that we need to double our production of fresh fruits and vegetables, which is our most labor-intensive part of our diet, our most necessary part of our diet. Right now, about 30% of it's grown out of the country, and of that's grown in the country, the other 60% is grown in Arizona and California, in a very small little narrow piece of our 50 states. 80% of that is picked and harvested and planted by people without any legal citizenship or that aren't supposed to be here according to our rules. And so this is creating a tremendous sense of opportunity. So what I basically work with the young men and women in our program, I say, go after the knowledge. I mean, your market plan, your market idea, these are great. Maybe we will definitely help and assist with that. But get the experience, get the knowledge, get out on different farms, work, spend some years, find what part of that agriculture you really like, find what scale you like. I got a couple years into it, and I got some bigger fields, and I wasn't the best mechanic, so I've kind of figured I wasn't actually good at much of anything, and so I accepted I liked being like the orchestrator. So I ended up, if I was a movie director, I'd be David Lean with the cast of thousands. So I liked having hundreds of people to work with me and be the kind of guy that orchestrated the movements and figured out, you're a good mechanic, you do that, you're good at this, you do that. Ultimately, I was the decision maker and the farmer of what got planted and when there were problems or what we did with it, just from sheer learning and trusting in my decision-making ability. I think decision-making is the number one skill a farmer needs to learn, and I think the best way to do that is to go someplace, start working somewhere, get involved, and over time take on more responsibility, and not be in too much a hurry to launch your own farm. I think telling a generation to go off and farm on their own is going to be our best recipe for having very few of you farming 5 years from now. But if you think of farming, the Jeffersonian idea that everyone has to go out and own their own piece of property, and pack and sell under their own label, that is wonderful, but there's no other part of our economy and industry that works that way, and it's not likely going to work in farming. And you're not any less of a farmer if you go work for someone else or take some while before you're able to launch your own business. So that's one of the things that there's a lot of ways into our industry. It's a wonderful industry. It's an exciting, dynamic way to spend your life. No 2 days are different, and it's something you want to jump up in the morning and go after it. Unlike Al says, I loved every day of it, and then at least once of the day during the day, I hate it. At least once during every day, I also hated it. It's kind of a love-hate relationship, but I wouldn't have gone another day without it.
Great, thanks. One thing that occurs to me, what you're saying, the ALBA program, which tries to train farm workers to become small organic farmers, I mean, in many instances, the people ended up just getting a better job as a production supervisor for the companies in Salinas.
Absolutely, but incubator farms are tremendous in general, and I know that Greg, Center for Land-Based Learning in Alba, the incubator farmer, we definitely I say this to the veterans in our program, an incubator farm is a great way to learn because you can take on a couple acres at a time and you don't have to build that large capital outlay to get your own equipment, and you can be involved in some on-site training and mentoring from the people that run the program, and you can start making your own record of sales and management in agriculture, which is ultimately what's required to get you lending through the USDA. So the Alba is a great incubator farm. But like I said, the farms there, besides those 960,000 farmers, which means somebody whose primary income is from the growing and selling of food or fiber. There's a little over 1 million something or 1.5 million farm workers. There's also 300,000 farm managers, and that's what I ended up doing in my career. And dollar for dollar, I think those 300,000 farm managers probably grew more food than the 960,000 farmers. And so those are people that were basically hired to farm, and some people might call it corporate. From my point of view, I was able to do it. I was able to convert 10 square miles of land into organic production that, as far as I know, not a single bit of it's gone back into conventional production, and grow a lot of good organic food, and treat my labor, famously well. And so it's a, it never felt any less like my farm. Until the day came that I had to move on and go do another one. So
Yeah, no, I think there's many routes to farming, and one of the things is that there's a lot of programs like at Cal Poly and so forth. The people there were telling me they can't get anyone to study soil science anymore, or to study water and irrigation and so forth. And all these people are going to retire, and they're not sure who's going to provide the technical expertise. And so that's another route that people could go who are interested in farming.
absolutely.
So, Mud,
Thank you.
give us some minutes here.
And I want to thank you all. This is the last panel of what has been a conference that's been beyond my expectations. Just stellar people here. I know I'm going to exploit a lot of the people I've met. But for the moment, Davey, would you come up here? Just come up to the stage. I want to thank you directly. And Charlotte, you too. Come on. Come up down here, Davey. You see Master Gardener, really great guy. Someone who wants Charlotte, get up, come on. These are from my farm. Would you just start and hand those out to folks? Charlotte's going to work with you. Again, the folks from Family Farm, huge thanks. That's my best way of doing it. And for those of you who want to be farmers, answering the question directly, rare moment for me. My dad is a car dealer. My mom's a realtor. So that's not exactly a direct pathway to becoming a farmer, unless you're rebellious. So at age 18, with dreadlocks down to here, I ended up on a Christian radical socialist intentional community run by Pennsylvania Dutch Church of the Brethren folks who didn't believe in war taxes or farm animals because they wanted to get arrested on a regular basis. The farmer's name, and you can Google him, he just passed away last year, verklempt. His name's Art Gish. Would go to the West Bank and tell Israelis to not bulldoze markets, and equally would be in November at the Athens, Ohio Farmers Market with vegetables for international students who couldn't get what they wanted to eat, whether it was bitter melons or long beans, for about 7,000 miles. He was that kind of guy. And so as a farmhand, who was actually a furniture maker's apprentice, as a farmhand, that was where I lived. Learn how to make furniture, farming, doing the whole organic gardening magazine, Diane Lane, romantic summers in Tuscany kind of lifestyle. Sitting on a compost heap in the wintertime because it was the warmest seat around. I didn't think about it much. I just did it. It was just what we did. And life moved forward for me, and I came to Los Angeles like David. I'm a former producer at Lollapalooza with a deep environmental sense of the world needs to be better. Hollywood has a lot of power. I've been here for 20-something years now. And in the past few years, I discovered these school gardens that are neglected. LA Unified has 5,000 acres of asphalt. And I was on the first panel on the Alpha side of this conference talking about those 5,000 acres of asphalt that are in old, whether it's North Hollywood's peach groves or the West Valley's citrus, or where I am now in San Pedro, which home of Greek, Japanese, and Latino farm families historically. And those what is the most productive farmland in the world. And LA County used to be the biggest beef, the biggest tomato, the biggest everything producer. We've decided to engage the natural world with asphalt. And as adults, theoretically I'm an adult, we've decided that children in LA Unified Schools, 700,000 kids, LA County, 1.5 million, will experience both the living world and the edible world through the worst possible list of choices, asphalt and nuggets. And so those flowers that you have, which today I got an amazing market report from one of my 4-year students. Her name's Vivian. She's hilarious. She's like, Mr. Mudd at the farmer's market a couple weeks ago, she goes, Mr. Mudd, I kicked your ass. Sorry, the A word was gonna get dropped. I go, what do you mean, Vivian? She goes, I made $25 bouquets like you do. And I go, really? You did? You clocked me. She goes, yeah, I'm so much better than you are. I go, Vivian, you got a good teacher. And so to get to that point, and this year we'll do about $50,000 in sales, thanks to BAMCO and our one sole vegetable producer. We'll do $500,000 in cash, because the heart of the work I do as a development person is direct angels to, well, frankly, angels, inspired teachers that want to get kids to garden, which is where the next generation of farmers comes from. And then on top of that, I'm a brand spokesman for a couple companies, two most notably, Seeds of Change, the largest organic heirloom seed company. They gave me about $6 million in bulk heirloom seeds, so there's not a single school in LA County that has to pay for seeds. Or Plugs, the hat I'm wearing, I'm like the NASCAR driver of the organic garden world. Plug Connection does $300 million or 300 million plants a year. They grow that many. That means they have 30 million. And the thing about the economy and one of the lessons we teach the kids is that, you know, Western civilization's based on things growing. These guys know that. You put some attention on it. The best fertilizer for a farm is these guys' shadow. You let the earth spin around this thing called the sun, and it tilts a little bit, and you get the seasons, and you get the climate. You get kids out on a farm like I do. They learn that too, that things grow. And that work of getting every kid to grow a tomato in LA and across the country is going to keep me busy a very, very long time, that I look forward to looking as old and grizzled as these guys in about 30 years. Now, respect to you.
Well, I tell you, let's take some questions. Do we have microphones in the audience? Yeah, do people have questions? Because I have questions if you don't, but let's give you a chance to ask some questions. Does anybody want to ask a question? Back in the back there.
I just have a question for the panel. How do you guys feel in regards to the move towards hydroponics, aquaponics? I've found that there seems to be a divide between whether we should be moving away from soil culture or if there's a way for it to kind of coexist.
Did anyone understand that?
Yeah, I heard it.
You wanna take a shot at it?
The question was, how do we feel about hydroponics, aquaponics, and soilless farming, right?
Yeah. You want to answer that?
I'll answer it. I think I'm a dirt farmer, and with all respect to aquaponics and hydroponics, I'm still learning to get it, but I'm appreciating it, and where I've seen it, such as Archie's Acres and where Greg's gone to study, it's been pretty phenomenal in terms of the conservation of water and the recycling of the water, and about a 90% reduction in water use, and a system that allows you to produce 52 weeks out of the year, high rate. So I think it's one of the ways that, that's why I say like knowledge is the base, to learn how to do that. I think a lot of the, some of the last most exciting production I've got to learn the last few years of my production in Mexico was indoor tomato production. I got to do about 30 acres of indoor tomatoes. We had plants that grew 30 feet tall and grossed about $250,000 a year. And so, but it was all in soil and all organic. And so I think there's a lot of going to be a lot of marriage of technology and nature in our lifetime to get these in some really, really exciting ways. And when you start talking about those costs of shipping produce, to do some of that type of farming, such as you've been learning on rooftops in Chicago or New York or Philadelphia, or in places where the asphalt already is, I think it's pretty exciting.
Anybody else want to say something?
Yeah, I doubt that we can duplicate nature's ability to deliver vitamins and minerals to plants through soil. I don't think we can do that, but I could be wrong. We might figure it out. Maybe not during my lifetime, but maybe someday. Maybe we'll need to, if the world population continues to spike up. But I can't relate to it myself anyway.
Other question?
Yeah, I wondered if anyone had any opinions, either pro or con, about Farmville, because I do gardening things, and my relatives are always sending me kind of things, investment schemes based on Farmville. And with respect to the kind of business plan thing and/or the knowledge base thing, if things like games and simulations have any role to play in popular education, or if, on the other hand, just going out and getting your hands dirty. I mean, obviously, there's no substitute for actually engaging in farming, but given that young people use social media and new media so much, if there are connections to be made between those kinds of, ways of spending your time and actually growing things.
That sounded like if I can take that one.
Sure.
And I'm going to ignore your question and go to a piece of it. My iPhone, I call Shovel. And to answer the question of the spirit of this panel, so you want to be a farmer? I use my iPhone and Instagram and Twitter. I'm Kokozochi on Twitter. How many of you use Twitter? Amazing connectivity tool like nobody's business. I've used it to raise $10 million in in-kind donations this year. You could think about it. It's about storytelling. And so as farmers, the utility of being able to tell your story, even the most mundane things about him cursing at his tractor and swearing enough to make Laura Avery nervous on a panel, is a amazing thing. You can take a picture of what you do, whether it's the flowers, whether it's the plums, and give people that slice. There was a young farmer that approached me on Friday. She's out in Coachella. Would have been great to have a female up here, but I'll speak for Megan herself. She's got 80 acres and truckloads of produce and no way to sell it. So, in spite of not wanting to be a marketing person, how many of you consider yourselves marketing people? Yeah, well, don't consider being a farmer unless you want to consider being a marketing person. Because trust me, Al is, he is not just a caricature of himself, he's a caricature of himself. And the folks, his customers, whether it was Art who trained me, with his big Amish beard and his big bald hat and his sandals made out of tires in December, that interactivity, that life. I post up on my 17,000 Twitter followers pictures of the field. Instagram is an amazing tool for taking the crappiest photo and giving it the organic gardening magazine layout spread. So for those of you who want to be farmers, becoming storytellers, because you're not going to be able to move those 2 truckloads of plums if you can't get into the Santa Monica Farmers Market like Megan can, unless you have a way to engage your clients. And when BAMCO, who is my sole CSA customer. I violate every rule of business. I have one customer. They also are a $500 million entity, so I'm not going to exhaust their buying power anytime soon. They didn't just buy my Sun Gold tomatoes for their local college, which actually the chef comes down, I take pictures, I stop him, I take a picture of Luis with the case of Sun Golds, and I post it up, and BAMCO 10 seconds later reposts it from Palo Alto, because they're selling the story too. And you've got to work with your customers. You've got to be savvy. I never thought I'd be grateful for my father being a car dealer, but I'm a car salesman's son for justice.
So you have the option of your father being a farmer or a car dealer if you want to go into farming. Other question?
I've got a question for the audience. How many of you want to be farmers?
Yeah.
That's great.
I have a quick follow-up to that. Any of you want a quarter acre to try being a farmer? All right, come find me afterwards. I've got a couple thousand.
So my question is, I was in the previous panel also, I feel like I was asked the how do you then question. My question is, how many of your students want to become farmers? And because when you were talking about, there were no students interested in taking soil science classes, or was there just not enough students to take the soil science classes? And my question is, how do we inspire people to want to go back to the land? And, is there room in LA to start planting again, or do we always have to go out? Not that I wouldn't, but not that I wouldn't go out there, but that we have to go out to Bakersfield or somewhere else. I mean, is it just, I guess my question, that's 3 questions. How do we inspire people to want to be farmers? I mean, because everything you're saying, I understand, and the gentleman, the 4th gentleman in, talking about, it's a different world for people who want to start farming now. But how do we inspire people to come back and do it? How do we grow farmers?
One of you who hasn't talked recently want to try that?
Well, I think it's kind of selling the story. It's hard to inspire someone to dedicate their life to feeding other people, which is what we're doing. So by using Twitter and using all this technology, you can inspire someone to try and join in on the story and experience it for themselves. And a good way to do that is go to the farmer's market, visit the farmers, talk to the actual farmers, try and get a visit out to their farm. And if you could feel what they're doing out there, yeah, I think that'll weed out the people that want to actually be farmers, because it is a lot of work. It's a different lifestyle.
No, I get that. I'm talking about, when you're dealing with kids at LAUSD, or, right?
Yeah, 50,000 of them a year.
How have they given them said this is something I want to do?
As a CTE teacher, because I, went to trade school, and I'm pretty smart and pretty stupid simultaneously. So being a bit of a knucklehead and being ADD, I need a project. So not all learners are traditional learners. The fraud of school gardens, it's not really about food. Sorry, Good Food Festival. You're dealing with profound issues when you're dealing with city kids. So the kids who have never tried to start a project before in their life, let alone finish it, given a goal, a few of them discover what they're capable of. And at the heart of being a career tech ed teacher, you want kids to count well, show up on time, listen to instructions, be nice. And if they problem solve on top of that, that's a bonus. So that basic threshold, I had culinary arts students this summer in our summer youth employment program. First day out, Daisy's walking around and she went to the hen house and she grabs eggs. She's so excited. There's a 15-year-old Salvadoran kid from South LA, from Santee High School. She's walking around all day with these eggs. I didn't know it. She had them in her pocket. So in the laugh house, about the first couple minutes in, she goes, "Oops." And I go, "What's up, Daisy?" She's like, "I probably shouldn't have carried these eggs around, but I was so excited." So it's a long process to become a farmer, and the business opportunities that are there, it's another step. So I'm not worried about creating farmers. I'm worried and dedicated, to creating whole kids. And some of those, because I'm friends with them, they're doing amazing work.
Yeah, I've discovered over the years that a lot of the organic farmers in Northern California grew up in Los Angeles, went to college, and decided they wanted to be a farmer. Ken Kimes, Jerry Thomas, Judith Redmond,
Larry Jacobs.
Larry Jacobs. I mean, Larry Jacobs' father was an industrialist here in LA. And so, it's like, just because you grow up in Los Angeles doesn't mean, that you can't be a farmer. Anybody can be a farmer, right? And so, that's what you'd find when you go around and talk to farmers. I mean, sure, there's a lot of people like Romeo. His father was a farmer, and that kind of points you in a direction, gives you a leg up and stuff. But as Al was saying, right? You need $1 million anyway, so it can come from anywhere. And but you know, maybe some of the other of you want to address this question of, you know, is there something that really will inspire more? Is it the school programs? You know, is it, you know, what will inspire people? We've worked on the Farm Bill for years to try to create beginning farmer programs to encourage people and make loans to people, help people, and so forth.
Poppy Davis.
Yeah, and now that's threatened in the current climate in Washington, D.C., and I'm happy to talk to anyone afterwards about that. But, you know, we've created these programs like ALBA and FarmLink and so forth, actively working with people, and now Farmer Veteran Program and so forth. It's like, you know, her question, you know, is there something more that we should be doing to inspire people to be farmers?
I know in our program, we're seeing a really, really high rate of the young men and women that come into our program that stick with it and look like they're going to be on a path to farming. So one of the things that we do is get them out on the farms and you know, spend time in that environment with other people that are looking into farming that have come from a similar experience. In this case, usually the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they're actively looking and searching for something new in life, and it seems to be resonating with a lot of them. It's just a matter of what we hear regularly after we have these types of events is, I didn't realize that there would be help or support or so much support for me to do that. And but I really think that the question's good because I think it's really, really important. It's a important question about food security and the economic future and viability of our country. And we're also a real unemployed and underemployed country when actually, and we're over-consumed. And so every other thing that we spend money on other than you know, teaching and nursing and the good things like that, we're actually, you know, taking our planet down. We're farming the more human capital. It's the human capital that's been replaced with the containment feeding of animals and with the overuse of pesticides and with genetically modified seeds. And so really, I really feel like the central issue, in my career, even though I was always an organic farmer and a kind of a pioneer organic farmer, I never badmouthed the conventional farmers because they were usually all my neighbors and friends. And I figured if I was going to show them, if I was going to succeed, they were going to copy what I was doing. We don't badmouth them either, but the reality is that we're not going to change the way we eat without a enormous increase in the amount of people that get their hands involved in the process of taking care of our land and our food. So I think it's a sea change, and I think we have to think not just about food, but about our value of work. I think that's something that we need to. I think that's the real half of the missing coin in this whole movement. You know, I think it's a real value that, you know, I mean, if there's anything that's gone haywire in the last 30 or 40 years, it's the idea that American value of a day's work is for chumps or suckers or people that don't want to make money in their life. And we've seen where that's brought us. And so I think it's a passion of mine to share my love of the work that I spent my life doing, including, you know, a day of hoeing weeds or a day of planting or a day of driving tractor. You know, I liked all that too. And so I love the actual work, every aspect of it. And I just think it's got to be our number one priority as a movement to you know, to spread the word to people that this is a valid and exciting and viable career choice, and jump into it. And those of us that have been around for a while need to help young people.
Yeah, right here. You can just.
A question. I know most of you are engaged in certainly large scale as in Michael, but certainly rural farmland and rural farming. So what do you think about the future or the viability of urban farming? I'm engaged in some of the most disinvested communities in Chicago on the south side and west side, and some of the ideas are to convert some of these empty lots to farmland. So what do you think about that from your own experience?
City farmer?
City farming.
Yeah, I get to be I'm the token a lot of things around here. I'm also the farmer florist. City farming. Well, first and foremost, I wrote an article on behalf of the event here. I write for LAist. I'm half Wendell Berry, half Charles Bukowski, and half Martha Stewart. So, you know.
So that's that one and a half.
Yeah, exactly. Have a few jobs. So the question is that I had asked is, what about the South Central Farm? So the question we have about urban farming in Los Angeles, because when I go to Chicago and I go to DC, the first thing out of their mouth is, what about the South Central Farm? Which betrays a certain inability of adults to act that way. 5, 6 years later, and those of you, anyone don't know the story of the South Central Farm? All right, so it's 14 acres, largest urban farm in the country. It was largely populated by displaced farmers from Central America in the wake of NAFTA, who are now making a living as gardeners, domestics, but they're farmers. So give them a 20 by 20 foot plot, they recreate these, the site was, you know, farmers have an immense base of knowledge, so that Romeo's dad taught him stuff he didn't even know he was being taught. It just, he picked it up, that's how you do it. That knowledge, when farmers are displaced, that knowledge is also lost. So the farm itself, real estate, mayor, city council, the garden's an excellent movie, I won't go into it, but it basically was a group of 300 families who wanted to have an urban farm in a food desert, what we've heard about and heard about and heard about, and a developer who acted a bit like a big baby, and since he writes bigger checks than the South Central farmers, the site was vacated rather dramatically. And 6 years later, the city of Los Angeles, those decision makers, have not come to terms with how to deal with this 14-acre parcel and how it's used. Because obviously, you know, none of these guys can compete. Phil McGrath, perfect example. Phil is, you know, at some point going to turn into a Sam's Club if the Sam's Club decision makers of the world decide that the Ventura Basin where he farms is better served by a Sam's Club. So half of it is abstract, obscure political public policy decision making. The other half, what kind of cities do we really want to live in where access to affordable, fresh, healthy, local, low carbon footprint vegetables are made available by people that have a stake, literally a garden, in their own food choices. There's no simple answer other than with our president, for example, he's not going to lead unless we make him. So for local politicians, they need to get out of their own way, and you in the audience need to all follow my columns on LAist, because I've taken it upon the mission to beat up the various folks in the LA Food Policy Council who can't have a serious urban ag policy without dealing with the South Central Farm. That said, urban farming is where people are, and there's ways that people can grow things that aren't that complicated either. But like a lot of things, it's complicated, and we don't often have the forum to discuss them in a long, meaningful way. And it's a bit of a shame that we're having this conversation now, because there was so much that could have gotten done, but I have a feeling that we're not going to leave this one.
I'd like to weigh in on this one. I think urban gardening could be incredibly important as a way of for people, young people who live in the city, to experience how food is grown and to experience on a small scale the actual opportunity to actually grow their own food or grow food for their neighborhood. And I think we'd identify a lot of future farmers who might move on to larger farming opportunities out in the rural countries if we have a strong urban garden program.
And one little detail that you guys like about urban gardening, a USDA marketing service did a study. Gardeners are they spend twice as much per capita at a farmer's market. Because they know what the good stuff is.
Yeah, I just think that it would increase the awareness of our food and the importance of our food and the deliciousness of our food. If more people were growing food in their backyards, their front yards, sidewalk strips, local community gardens, I think those are all great opportunities and great ideas.
Yeah, so get out, tear up that lawn, get out the jackhammer.
It's all about education,
Angeles,
it's all about awareness, and it's all about actual experience. And I
Yeah.
think that's what
Los
we're
Angeles
lacking.
is a great place to grow food, probably one of the greatest places in the world to grow food. Any more questions? I think we're going to have to wrap up here. I think we've come to the end of our time. So if there aren't any more questions, thanks a lot for coming, and let's give our panel a hand.
Real pleasure.
Great work.